Hello everyone and welcome to Biology Made Easy. In this video I'm going to discuss about cells. We'll have a recall on cell theory, cell classification, and a brief look on cell division, cell differentiation, as well as types of stem cells. Starting with cell theory, we go back in time to 1665 at the time of Robert Hooke, who is the scientist behind the discovery of cells. So Robert Hooke discovered cells by inventing a very primitive and simple microscope, and accidentally he was looking at a sample that he collected from a bark of a tree. It was dead plant cells, and he saw these structures and he named them cells. Later on, Robert Hooke was able to publish his first book, and he put this image in his book, Micrographia. Years after that, other scientist Anton van Leeuwenhoek in 1674, 9 years after the discovery of Robert Hooke, he discovered living cells. And he was able to do that by inventing more advanced microscope. And as can you see, as the advances of the microscope was progressing, as we had more discoveries in terms of microscopic things such as cells and even later on organelles inside cells. So every scientist who came after those scientists was trying to invent a better microscope, a better version of the microscope, so that he would be able to look more and discover more within the cells. So we start with Anton van Leeuwenhoek. Then after that came Theodor Schwann. Theodor Schwann in 1836, he was a physiologist, and he discovered that all animals are made of cells. Then came the botanist after 2 years in 1638. Then came the botanist after 2 years in 1838, Matthias Schleiden. By the way, all these scientists are German. And he came up with the same conclusion, but for plants. And he said that plants are made of cells. 22 years after that, again another German scientist, Rudolf Virchow, in 1855, came to a conclusion that cells come from existing cells. And these were considered the basics of the cell theory, which is made of 3 parts. The first part is cells are the basic units of life. All living organisms are made of 1 or more cells, and cells come from pre-existing cells. Thanks to the work of those scientists and other scientists as well, we were able to understand more about cells, and all the other topics and courses or subjects related to cell biology were based on the work of those scientists. So this is regarding cell theory. Now, speaking about cells, we divide cells into 2 main types, as you know, the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. So let's revise quickly the difference between these two cells. Prokaryotes or prokaryotic cells are cells that don't have a nucleus, they have only DNA, which form one single circular chromosome, cell membrane, cell wall, and ribosomes. And all prokaryotes are unicellular organisms. It means single-celled or made of one cell only. Example, bacteria. These cells reproduce asexually, so there is no male, no female, and one cell is the complete organism. So all the life processes take place in one cell. At the other hand, eukaryotes or eukaryotic cells are cells that contain a nucleus and other organelles. We call them membrane-bound organelles, such as mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, vesicles, and so on. And eukaryotes or eukaryotic cells can be either animal cell or plant cell. And there are eukaryotes that are unicellular, such as paramecium or yeast, and they can be multicellular. Now, since our topic is cell division in humans, so we'll be looking at the multicellular organisms. It's good to know that multicellular organisms, their cells are eukaryotic cells, they have nucleus and they have organelles. And speaking about multicellular organisms, are organisms that have levels of organization, where these levels start with cells, and a group of cells form a tissue. Then many tissues working together form an organ. And many organs working together to perform specific function can form an organ system. So these are the levels of organization in a living multicellular living organism. And many organ systems work together to form the organism. Speaking about humans, we have 11 organ systems that work together in order to allow the body to function and sustain all life processes. Okay, so these are the levels of organization in a multicellular organism. Now we ask a very important question. How does the life of a multicellular organism start? How does your life start? Life starts as one cell, one single cell, which we call the fertilized egg. So multicellular organisms can reproduce sexually and asexually. Speaking about humans, we reproduce asexually. It means that there must be two genders, there must be two reproductive cells, the sperm and the egg cell. The sperm is the male reproductive cell and the egg cell is the female reproductive cell. During fertilization, the chromosomes that the sperm is carrying, which are 23, join with the 23 chromosomes that the egg have to form a cell that contains 46 chromosomes. And this is the first cell in human life, and we call it the fertilized egg. And the journey of every human starts with this cell. So it's only one cell, and then this cell will start dividing and differentiating until the organism is ready after 9 months or 7 months, is ready to have an independent life where delivery will happen and the life will start independently. So there are a lot of questions that we can ask at this point. How can one cell give rise to a complete organism? What are the processes that allow this cell to divide? What allows organs to form and organ systems, and why these organs are located here and that organs are located there? All the answers are located here in the nucleus, in the DNA deoxyribonucleic acid, in the genetic material of the fertilized egg. So during the development of the embryo, there are two main processes that take place. The first one is cell division. The other one is cell differentiation. So cell division is simply cells divide to produce more cells. They multiply and then they divide. And cell differentiation is while the cells are dividing, they produce new types of cells. Speaking about type of cells, we have more than 200 types of cells in the body. And every cell has a certain structure and function. So every cell, it carries a certain function and it has a certain structure. And there is a direct relationship between structure and function. So I'm going to draw here some types of cells. Then we are going to discuss the function of these cells. Okay, these are 4 types of cells. This is a tissue, another one, and this is one cell. So if you look at each of these cells, all of these are located in the human body. They have different structure, they have different shape, different size maybe, and definitely each one has a specific function. So looking at this tissue, this one is the skin tissue, or we call the epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is the tissue that forms the skin. And if you look at these cells, they form layers. Each one is called epithelial cell or skin cell. They are very close to each other. They are relatively small in size and have similar shape, and they are packed together, and this is important so that they can function, they can play the function of a barrier that supports and protects the body. So because of their structure and the way they are grouped together, they can perform the function which is protecting and covering the body. Now we move to the second group of cells. These cells are these are the muscle cells, and as can you see, they are elongated. And again, the structure of these cells help them performing their function, which is contracting and relaxing, moving body parts. So these cells are able to contract or shorten and elongate, and by doing that they can move body parts. The third set of cells I have here are RBCs, red blood cells. Red blood cells are round and relatively small cells, very small cells. They don't have a nucleus, they don't have organelles. So if I ask, do they divide? They don't divide. They are dead cells. They only function for 3 months and then they are broken down and the new are formed in the bone marrow. These cells, they have this structure for one reason, that they need space for hemoglobin. So the cytoplasm in the cell here is filled with hemoglobin, which is the red pigment that carries oxygen in the red blood cells. So again, the structure of these cells being round and small and free of any organelle, any DNA, anything, only filled with hemoglobin, allow these cells to function as a transport system for oxygen in the body. And speaking about these cells, if there is any change in the structure, definitely this will affect the function. We take here an example of a disease called sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is a genetic disorder that affects the red blood cells so that they will start having this shape. Instead of being round, they will have like a sickle shape, or like the crescent of the moon. Now, if these cells are like that, they won't have enough hemoglobin, and as a result, this will affect the transport of oxygen. People who have sickle cell anemia, they must not do a lot of effort because their body cannot carry a lot of oxygen. Again here, any modification or any change in the structure will affect the function of the cell or even the body part. So this rule, structure to function relationship, is applied to all body parts, is applied to everything related to what God created. Everything has a certain structure, and this structure is needed to perform a certain function. And looking at our last example, this is a neuron, or it is a single nerve cell. This is the most complex and complicated cell. As can you see, this is atypical cell. It means its shape doesn't look like any cells that we have seen before, because it has a lot of extensions called dendrites. It has a long part called the axon, and it has axon terminals or connections. All of this is only one cell. And for this reason, in the human life, after adulthood, if there is any damage in the nervous tissue, the body cannot repair it, because it requires embryonic cells to create these cells. We cannot regenerate these cells in our life. So any damage in the brain, any damage in the spinal cord cannot be fixed or repaired by the body, because these cells are highly differentiated. They are highly complicated and complex cells. They are formed only once during the embryonic life. Unlike red blood cells, unlike skin cells, so if we lose blood, our body can regenerate, because creating red blood cells is easy. These cells are very simple compared to neurons. So again, the shape or the structure of the neuron, it allows us to perform its function, which is carrying signals, communicating body parts together. So these are 4 types out of many other types in the body, and every type has a certain structure and a certain function. Now, let's continue discussing about cells and move to, or let's go back to the fertilized egg. So all of these cells that we have explained, they come from one cell, the fertilized egg. And in a human body, in the same body, Every cell, regardless of its type, it has the same genetic information, the same DNA. So if I take a sample of your skin cells, of your bone cells, your neurons, your white blood cells, and I do DNA electrophoresis or DNA testing, I will see that all your DNA in every cell is the same. Now, how is it possible that the cells that have the same DNA but they are different? If they have the same DNA, maybe they're supposed to be the same. Here comes a very important fact, that yes, your cells have the same DNA, but they don't use the same genes. They don't use the same amount of DNA. What I mean, imagine your DNA is a book, is a biology reference that has information, and you are using this book for grade 10, 11 and 12. So in grade 10 you have the same book, you used the first 3 chapters. In grade 11 you still have the same book, but you are using other chapters, chapter 15, 16, 17, and in grade 12 you are using chapters 20, 21, 22. So you still have the same book in all the years, but you are using different information. It's the same story when it comes to cells. All our body cells have the same DNA, but not all our body cells use, or let's use the biological term, express the same amount of DNA or the same genes. And this topic is called, and it's a very important topic in biology, gene expression. We will have a lesson about gene expression later on, so I'm not going to explain it more further, just introducing this term because it's important to understand that gene expression is behind differentiation, is behind creating diverse types of cells by allowing genes to turn on and turn off. For example, a neuron cell might use 70% of the DNA. Maybe a blood cell might use, white blood cell, maybe 20% of the DNA. That's why they are different. So gene expression is how much of the DNA is expressed, how much of the information in the DNA is used. So if I use different information, I will have a different cell. And let me give you one example. Imagine you have a book of recipes, and you use this book in order to cook different types of food. But all of the types of food that you cook are from this book, one book only. So let's say today you open at page 10, you have this recipe. The other day you have another recipe. When you use another recipe, you will have definitely you will prepare different food. Okay, the same idea of DNA. So your DNA is the same everywhere in your body, in all your cells, but it is not used in the same way in all cells. That's why we have different cells and we have different functions. Now, the last part is stem cells. Fertilized egg is considered the mother stem cell in your body. This is the first stem cell. So what is a stem cell? A stem cell is a cell that divides, and it has the potential to produce the same type of stem cells. So stem cells can divide and produce stem cells, and they can produce other types of cells like muscle cells, blood cells, this is nerve cells, liver cells, etc. So stem cells are behind creating a multicellular organism with 11 organ systems and tens of organs and hundreds of types of cells. And we divide the types of stem cells into 3 main types, and this is our last part. So we have the first stem cell in a human life or in a living organism life, multicellular living organism, which is the fertilized egg. this is the first and the most important stem cell. The other type of stem cell, we call them embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells are the stem cells that are found only in the embryo. It means after birth, these cells no longer exist, and usually those cells can be collected from the umbilical cord during delivery, and they can be used for stem cell therapy later, and we will discuss this later. The third type of cell is called adult stem cell. Adult stem cells. So if I want to say which one has the maximum potential or the highest ability to differentiate, definitely it's the fertilized egg, because the fertilized egg can give rise to a complete human being. Embryonic stem cells can form organ systems and organs, and they have great potentials. Whereas adult stem cells, they don't have really high potentials. They can form only tissues such as skin, muscles, blood. Now, embryonic stem cells and adult stem cells and fertilized eggs, they have another scientific term. We call them, for the fertilized egg, totipotent stem cell. Embryonic stem cells are called pluripotent stem cells, and the adult stem cells are called multipotent stem cells. These are the three types of stem cells, and as we said that all of them, they have the ability to differentiate, but the level of the differentiation varies from one to another. The fertilized egg can differentiate into any type of cell. So if we are able to have a fertilized egg dividing and differentiating, we can have a living organism. Whereas embryonic stem cell, it cannot form a complete living organism, but embryonic stem cells, they can divide and give organs and organ systems. And those cells are the cells that form your heart, your brain, all your body parts during embryonic life in the mother's body. And the adult stem cells, and those cells usually are located in the bone marrow. And these cells are needed to repair and to replace dead cells, for example, skin, blood, muscle cells, bone cells. But these cells cannot form a complete organ. For example, if someone is having kidney failure, the body cannot create a new kidney. In order to create a new kidney, the body needs embryonic stem cells. And this is what the new approach in stem cell therapy is heading to use the stem cells that were collected during delivery from the umbilical cord in order to treat organ failure. So that's it for this presentation. To have a quick recall on what we have explained, we recalled the parts of the cell theory. We discussed about the two types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Then we listed the levels of organization in a multicellular organism. Then we answered the question, how does the life of a multicellular organism start? We discussed different types of cells, their structure and their function, and we related the function to the structure. We introduced the term gene expression, and we said that gene expression is behind differentiation, behind having cells of different structure and function. And gene expression is controlling how much of the gene or the DNA is being used by turning on and off parts of the DNA. And last, we discussed about the types of stem cells. We said there are 3 types: the totipotent stem cells or the fertilized egg, the pluripotent stem cells or the embryonic stem cells, and the adult stem cells or the multipotent stem cells. That's it for now. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.